Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today I'm very excited to welcome back a guest we've had on before, Fabienne Sandoval. Welcome, Fabienne.
Hi, Lyn. Thanks so much for having me on the show again. I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. And what I really love about Fabienne is she's such a loving soul, and she's so aligned with what love professionals and love connectors do, and so much in sequence with what I am all about as well, in terms of wanting to collaborate. And, you know, we're all about wanting to give great value to the audience. For those people that are listening that have not heard our previous episode where Fabienne was talking about attachment styles, I would highly recommend that you do so and go back to listen to episode 47 where we had Fabienne talking about the 3 attachment styles. We will just briefly have a bit of an overview around those again, but if you want to know a little bit more in depth about what they are and what they represent, then we're just going to sort of do, I suppose, like a bit of a part 2 today around the attachment style. So Fabienne, can you just, for those listeners that are not, just want a bit of a refresher, I suppose, about what attachment styles there are, can you just refresh them around what you teach and what they represent?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of attachment styles, what we mean when we talk about that is the way in which people perceive and respond to intimacy in romantic relationships. And there are 3 styles that we can behave. One of them being anxious. This is where people tend to be a little bit concerned about their partner's ability to actually love them back, and they often become really preoccupied with their relationships when they're in them. The second one is avoidant. So this is people who they equate intimacy with a loss of independence, and they really try to minimize the amount of closeness that they have with their partner. And then the final one is secure. So I think that kind of is pretty obvious. It does what it says on the tin. So typically secure people feel comfortable with intimacy, and they're typically warm and loving. So those are the 3 styles of attachments.
Excellent. Now, I hadn't actually heard of it referred to as attachment styles before, but having listened to your explanation on our previous episode that we did together, I thought, you know what, this all sounds very familiar to me, but I've always looked at it and always taught my information around the masculine and feminine energy and how that works in relationships. And for me, you know, I teach that we all have masculine and feminine energy, and if you are in opposite sex relationships, and usually what that means is that the feminine energy is primarily the female, the woman's most strongest natural energy within the relationship, and vice versa for the man. And it's not always the case, but usually that's how it shows up. So are you familiar yourself with masculine and feminine energy, Fabienne?
Yeah, I am, and it's something that I think is really interesting. And you know, I would say in terms of the feminine and masculine energies, especially a lot of the research that I've done, I think it's really interesting how we do perceive, you know, if you are in an opposite sex relationship, you do always typically think, oh, well, the guy will be the masculine, the woman will be the feminine, and that's kind of typical. But I think because women are obviously going out and they are learning how to lead, and they're learning more how to, you know, do what they feel is best and really kind of create their own life. I think some of the time what I've seen is women are a little bit too tuned into the masculine energy and sometimes fall off balance there, in terms of the modern times that we're in now. And I'm finding that men are more so stepping into their feminine, because really in today's times everything is acceptable, isn't it? I mean, there's not really one rule fits for anything. We can kind of make up the rules as we go, so to speak. There isn't so much of a law around what needs to be, whether we need to be a certain way or not. Although I would say, I find that people that have difficulty in being in relationships, especially women, some of the women that I've worked with, I've found it's because they are used to having this kind of work ethic, and they're really tapping into that masculine energy in order to drive their business forward or their career forward. And then when they come to relationships, they forget to tune that masculine energy down a little bit. And they're like, oh, I really want to be in a relationship where I feel appreciated and where I feel, like I've got, a strong masculine man. But actually they're not recognizing they need to kind of do some balancing out for themselves when they come to relationships, and not bring that masculine energy with them that they might be using in the workplace.
Yeah, so true. And this is spot on. It is exactly what I teach in my events. So it is literally that we've not been educated around this stuff in schools or through, our parents. Our parents are totally ignorant about how usually the masculine and energy and feminine energies work in relationships. So it's not surprising, that in modern times, that it's not being taught, so that we can really raise our awareness and have phenomenal, passionate, alive relationships. Because what I've discovered is that, when women get hurt, if they've been through any trauma, especially at the hands of men, or if they've wanted to really succeed in the workplace, the high achievers, the way they've learnt to do that is through modelling men, and emulating their traits and stepping more into their masculine energy. And we quite often do that as well, default into our masculine energy on the back of being hurt. So we put on our suit of armor on the back of being hurt, and we take on these masculine traits on the back of being hurt, as well as doing so, if we want to succeed or compete within a workplace environment or even a sporting environment, we are stepping into that masculine energy. And then what we're not realizing is that men are not attracted to that, because all men are feeling in those situations where you are exuding that masculine energy is another masculine energy in the room. So they feel very challenged by that, and they won't even know why that is, because they've not been educated about this stuff either. They'll just feel it. They'll just feel there's another masculine energy in the room, and they'll feel, very much challenged by that, especially if they are a strong masculine energy themselves. And what usually happens in those situations is that you're likely to have, if you're in a relationship where that's present, where you are more stepping into or are not aware that you're in your masculine energy, and he is very strong in his masculine energy as well, is that you're likely to have more conflicts. And you won't even know the reason why. And it's because, there's the two men in the room basically at that particular moment in time.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I completely agree. One of the things, I think that's the thing. And then, the people in the relationship, the two people in the relationship cannot understand why they keep butting heads, or why, there's this tug of war. But it's ultimately the power of the masculine energy, who has it. And if both people have it at the same time, it's definitely going to cause conflict, like you say. And I spent quite a few years not recognizing that. I think you alluded to the fact that especially when women get hurt, we kind of move more into that masculine energy from a sense of protection, so it's almost like that wounded masculine energy starts to come out, where we start to be a little bit more maybe controlling, a little bit more withdrawn, maybe a little bit more avoidant. And when that kind of happens, it's hard for us to then tune back out of that masculine energy. We move into it from a place of kind of protection, and we almost stay there, and then we start kind of dating and whatnot, and then we get into relationships and we think, why is this not working out? And we can't figure it out because, like you said before, it's not taught in schools. This kind of stuff is not something that's necessarily such common knowledge. I think more and more so now we are hearing more about all of these kinds of wonderful things, and I think it is becoming more known, but it's not taught from a very basic level. And I think you'll remember from last time I spoke to my own kind of teachings, which was really about learning how to love. We don't really get taught about things like masculine and feminine energies, attachment styles, and so it's quite difficult for us to learn how to love if that education isn't there for us. So I think it's really wonderful, your podcast, everything like that, so that we can actually be able to learn more about what's going on with love and what we can tune into and how we can balance ourselves out.
Absolutely, 100% agree. So I feel that if any women are listening and they actually can resonate with maybe feeling that men are intimidated by them, or that yourself, you're keeping men at arm's length and your heart isn't open because, of past experiences, or because, you are a high achiever and are taking on those more masculine traits, then hopefully this will resonate with you and you'll realise that probably, it's due to the fact that you're mainly living in that masculine energy, and men are feeling that and picking up on that. They're very sensitive to that.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think one thing that I learned in my journey was the fact that it's also about the individual. So some men will be more, from a generalization, we obviously say men are more masculine energy orientated and women are more feminine energy. But that isn't obviously always the case, like we mentioned before. And so I think for those people that are, say you are a woman, but you are definitely more rooted in your masculine energy, and that's where you feel good, that's where you like to operate from, then, I would say take a look at that and actually, figure that out. Because if you are, there isn't anything wrong with you. You can continue to stay in that masculine energy. It just means you need to be, when you're looking for a relationship, you need to look for a relationship. If you're looking for a relationship opposite sex partners, then you need to look for a man that's more rooted in his feminine energy. And so that's one thing to really be aware of in terms of dating. I know for a long time I was really rooted in my masculine energy due to a lot of the wounds that I had, but that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to be, per se, the leader in my romantic relationships. I did want to be the feminine energy, and I wanted the man to be the masculine energy. And so it caused me a lot of confusion for a while, because I was like, I don't understand what I'm doing. And then when I realized, I'm rooted in my masculine energy, I'm not going to attract a masculine man if I'm owning my masculine energy. And all I kept attracting was really feminine energy styles, where I was the one where I was more the leader of the relationship. So I think it's really important, if there are, women listening that are feeling like they're having this struggle with their relationships, they can't understand why, then just take a look. Maybe it is that you are more rooted in your masculine energy, and maybe you actually just need to start to dial that back a little bit and step more into the feminine energy, so that you can then attract a masculine man. Or alternatively, if you like being that masculine energy, just be conscious of what you're looking for. So you'll be looking more primarily for a feminine energy type man.
But this is just the thing. I think most women, especially successful women, are looking for that strong masculine energy man and not realizing they're putting those men off themselves. Because like you realised yourself, that that's what you actually were looking for, but weren't attracting, and instead was attracting more men that are more stepping, and allowing themselves to be controlled and dominated, and thereby stepping more into their feminine energy. And that's not what most women are attracted to. They're not attracted to another feminine energy because that's just a girlfriend type relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I completely agree.
Which I can say I had with my ex-husband for 23 years, on the back of going through some very traumatic events in my teens at the hands of men. I then only wanted a man who I could control, basically. I wanted to feel
Yeah.
safe and secure and loved, and which he did make me feel safe and secure and loved. But that was enough for me. I also wanted to be able to control that relationship, not realizing or having the awareness of the knowledge that I've got now in knowing this, the stuff around masculine and feminine energy and how it works. So I was the one that was controlling that relationship, and that suited me for 23 years, but I didn't feel fulfilled in that relationship because all we had, as I said, was more of a girlfriend type relationship. Although there was intimacy, it just wasn't, there wasn't the passion.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really resonate with that. And I would say, for me, what I had found is quite a lot of my relationships, because I was so strong, because I'd had to learn how to be so strong in, what had happened during my upbringing and things like that. I had become very much a protector. I have two younger sisters, and so I kind of stepped into. We kind of joke about it, but it's not actually that funny. But we kind of say that I was the daddy of the family, and so I was very much in that protective role. So strangely, I then, because I was kind of really rooted in that, kept attracting a lot of men that sort of needed saving and they needed protecting, or they needed help. And so I was just constantly repeating that same pattern over again, thinking, when am I going to get someone that's going to lead? And every time I would go on a date with someone that, they would be the leader, it wouldn't last for more than about, 3-4 dates, because either I would be frustrated because I would be like, why can't we do it my way? Or alternatively, they would kind of get fed up because they'd be like, no, it's not what I'm looking for. I want that kind of, that real feminine energy. So one of the things I'm thinking, we're obviously talking about the feminine and the masculine and things like this, and I'm just thinking for any listeners, how do we, I guess, from your perspective, Lyn, how do we share with them what the feminine traits are versus what the masculine traits are? I think so that people can tune into understanding that's not necessarily whether you were born, male or female, but the kind of traits and the energy around femininity and masculinity, so that people can understand what they are. And if they're looking for that, if they're looking to be more feminine, what do they need to do to step in?
Well, there's one big one, and that is relinquishing control, which we've already touched on. It is literally, that is the big one, relinquishing control, letting go of the need to control, because, that is the very masculine trait. A man does like to take charge. He does and this is talking about the healthy masculine, and there's the unhealthy and the healthy, both in the masculine and the feminine. So in the healthy masculine, he's the one that's assertive. He's the one that's chivalrous. He's the one that's protective, and wants to cherish his woman and treat her like a queen. The unhealthy masculine energy is that, you'll probably, some of you resonate with this, if you're in an unhealthy or toxic type relationship. The unhealthy masculine is that one that's very domineering, aggressive, and possessive, that sort of chauvinist pig type relationship, and then the unhealthy feminine that he attracts within that type sort of relationship is the feminine who is the submissive, subservient, and desperate and needy energy. That's the unhealthy feminine. And the healthy feminine is the feminine who is, very sensual, very nurturing, very compassionate. So, it's leaning into your own natural energy, really, because most women, if you're in and you're attracted to opposite sex relationships, are naturally feminine. At their core, that's their more dominant energy. It's just we've forgotten. We've forgotten it's there, and how to use it, because we've been conditioned to be more like men and educated to be more like men to succeed in the workplace, as well as, as I say, we naturally default into masculine energy on the back of being hurt as well.
Yeah, that was really great, Lynn. I think that, just sharing those traits and people understanding what the healthy masculine and the healthy feminine looks like, and versus the unhealthy. And I can definitely resonate with some of those ones that you've said. I've definitely had my fair of relationships like that, and I think that's what got me so curious about love, and how we could do it right and how we could learn more.
See, what I've learned is it's the polarization of energies that creates the passion and the intimacy and the aliveness in a relationship. But you can get that, obviously, that polarization within unhealthy relationships as well. So the more, that's why I sort of distinguish between the two types, because obviously I'm not trying to educate people to be submissive or subservient in relationships. That's the worst case scenario, and I want to make that distinction, because I think some women do think that that's what I'm trying to teach, and obviously it's not.
Yeah, I really, really agree with you on that, because it's easy once we start talking about things like the feminine and the masculine energy, it's easy to think that those unhealthy versions of the energy is because that might be more obvious in the world. When you think about masculine energies or feminine energy, you might think, oh yeah, well, a subservient type woman, and really understanding what it means from a healthy perspective to be in those energies and understand them. And I think coming back to the attachment styles that we spoke about before, it's not necessarily, I think one of the reference points that I always look to is a book called Attached, and it's by Dr. Amir Levine and Rachel Hellier. They don't necessarily refer to the attachment styles from an energy perspective, but in terms of my understanding of it, the way that I very much see it is that the anxious attachment style is very much that sort of unhealthy feminine energy, when you're becoming too insecure, too needy, sort of codependent in an unhealthy way, and really kind of desperate. The avoidance style is the unhealthy version of the masculine energy. So it's really interesting how we can also apply those to the attachment styles, really to see how the masculine and feminine energies fit with that as well.
I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was going to say myself. This is how I see it, them linking to the attachment styles are exactly the same. I was going to say, how does it link with the attachment styles? I was going to say, just exactly what you've just said, that it's the unhealthy feminine traits that lead me to think that that's very similar to how you describe the anxious attachment style, and the unhealthy masculine is very much around how you describe the avoidance attachment style. And as I said, if you want to know more about these styles, we did talk more deeply around this in episode 47, when we had another conversation really specifically around all these different attachment styles.
Yeah, exactly. And I think obviously when you think about the energies and balancing them out and having a balanced energy, that's really where the secure attachment style comes in, which is obviously what we are, ultimately aiming for. So, I mean, no matter what, and I think, we definitely talked about this in the previous episode, but, whether you're anxious or avoidant, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's not something to be ashamed of or anything like that. It's really just there to serve as the knowledge of what was it that happened in your life that brought you to be in this position that you feel that way, and then understanding those styles and how they work, understanding what a secure style would look like, and then I think being able to then bring in the energy just allows us to take that teaching to another level. And so I think it's really cool to be able to connect those styles back to, you know, the masculine and feminine energy.
Oh, certainly. And I think, you know, we're all striving to have that secure relationship, but within that secure relationship, we want the passion and the aliveness as well. And that's why I think it's important to stress, you know, having the polarization of energies. In other words, the more feminine you can be and learn to be and feel comfortable to be, the more liberating that is, because you know, as you practice being your true natural self, it is very liberating. And as you practice letting go of control, you know, it feels more natural to be who you truly meant to be. You know, and that naturally is you know, as the strong feminine energy. Because if we get too similar, you know, a lot of I think I hear a lot of relationship coaches talk about having this balance, and they actually are teaching around, you know, having equal amounts of masculine and feminine, and I'm very much saying no. You know, it's not about, you know, being very similar energies. And you attracting a very, you know, middle ground man on the back of that, because that's what I had with my ex-husband. That's when, you know, if you're trying to be sort of hovering around the middle ground where, you know, you're sort of, you know, sometimes a bit masculine, sometimes a bit feminine, and then there's no polarization, and he's the same. That's when you do have the friendship, you know, and it's an okay relationship that you're just settling for. Rather than, you know, the aliveness and the passion where you've got the more feminine you can be, the more you're going to bring out his masculine, red-blooded male and masculinity, and that's when you do know you're in a very, very, you know, passionate, alive relationship.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's sort of, you know, in terms of what we're sort of looking for, and like you said, you know, I think this is what everybody is striving for, you know, this alive, passionate, secure, loving, you know, partnership with somebody that we feel that we can be our true authentic selves. And I think it is definitely important to note that, you know, that really is driven by the polarities. And if you think about it, you know, I know from my perspective, when I was in more unhealthy relationships, that polarization was still there, but it was there in like the negative sense. Once I was able to kind of step and tune into my own energy better, I was able to kind of dial out those unhealthy habits and traits. One of them definitely being the control, that's for sure. And then I was able to tune in, and, you know, I think you just mentioned it, but, you know, you really do feel so great when you're able to tune into who you were meant to be. And, you know, I think especially when you're dating and you're, you know, in that phase, you're looking for somebody, you're looking to attract a partner. I think it's, you know, really important to know if you are looking to be the feminine energy in a relationship. And so this really goes for any kind of relationship, whether it's same sex, whether it's opposite, whatever it is. If you are looking to be the feminine energy in a relationship, then you definitely want that at the very beginning of like dating someone, and really keep as strong in that feminine energy as possible for at minimum the first 6 months. I think after you get past that phase, you've established like the boundaries for your relationship and who is playing what part. So the masculine feels very confident that that's what their role is. The feminine energy feels confident in their role. And then I think past that kind of 6 month year mark, when people are comfortable in the roles, that's when things can start to, you know, say, for example, I don't know, you're the feminine energy, but you really love doing the budgets and the finance, for example. That's probably more of a masculine task. But if that's something you really enjoy doing, I think, you know, it's totally up for discussion. Like, okay, you know, maybe I'm more doing you know, these kinds of, I'm acting more in this way, but actually I really want to do that task. And then I think then you're allowed to kind of divvy up the tasks going forward from there. So I don't want people to think that if they're a woman and, you know, we're talking about feminine energy, that they think that they just have to be in the kitchen cooking and looking after children all day. That's definitely not what we are. That's definitely not what we're saying. So you still must, you know, for sure stay true to to who you are. And, you know, if you are a leader in your business or in your workplace, you know, you can definitely still continue to be that person. So it's not about changing who you are and what you do, and becoming like subservient, like we've mentioned. It's actually about playing the role of where you feel more comfortable in terms of the relationship. And then as you move forward into that and you've established boundaries and roles and you know where you stand, then you can start to bring in these things and say, actually, you know what, going forward, I'd like to do this kind of task. It might seem more masculine, but something that I really enjoy doing. And then you can continue to create the balance in the relationship and create the polarization, you know, that you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that, you know, we've got masculine and feminine energies for a reason, you know, and you know, it is there in women to protect us and keep us safe. But all I'm saying is if you do need to be in a masculine energy space in your work environment, or if you're in a competitive sports field, for example, where you need masculine energy to compete, then that's fine. There's no problem with that. But just remember, you know, to take that suit of armor off when you get home behind closed doors. And if you're wanting passion and intimacy in your relationship and you're wanting him to take the lead and be the man in the relationship, then take the trousers off.
Definitely.
Yeah. You know, it's just about recognizing, you know, because I think a lot of women definitely complain about not attracting the strong masculine male that they're looking for, and then are not absolutely realizing that they're actually, you know, partly responsible for that not being the case.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think when we think about the feminine qualities, you know, I mentioned it before, you know, thinking about being in the kitchen and looking after children and this kind of stuff. But you know, I think that it's really important to, you know, kind of understand what those feminine qualities are. So we're not saying, you know, go and be somebody different or anything like that, but really to tap into what those divine feminine qualities are. And that is a lot more around, you know, following your intuition, um, you know, being more of that kind of nurturing, caring role. I think, you know, from a feminine energy perspective, there's a greater offering for healing, um, you know, more, you know, being more gentle in the way that you are expressing yourself. I think the feminine qualities are typically more kind of patient, definitely more emotional, typically, and more expressive, and communicative. Um, and then obviously the masculine energies. So the things that you're probably finding yourself tapped into more, if you're noticing this kind of issue, which I think really is very common in women that are looking for a, you know, a sacred partnership. The masculine qualities that they're probably finding themselves more tuned into are things around, you know, logic, reasoning, you know, just action. So not actually allowing the person that you are dating to, you know, come up with a plan and action things, you know, things like
Take the lead, you know.
yeah,
I think a
exactly.
lot of women actually do enjoy a man who does take the lead, but then don't allow him to do so.
Definitely. But I think that it's, you know, because we get so used to, so tuned into, so conditioned to, you know, these more kind of masculine habits and ways of being, that it feels very vulnerable to step into that feminine space. And I know that for me, it really did feel very, very vulnerable. I was like, this is, you know, I feel so, you know, I felt even more out of balance, which was kind of hilarious. Because I think when you first come into it, you're coming into the feminine so deeply that that's kind of all that you're seeing and that's all that you're working with. So it takes a while to obviously balance things out. So maybe when you first start to step into that, it's like anything that we try that's new. It's always going to be, you know, we're always going to feel a little vulnerable. We're always going to feel outside of our comfort zone, doing something new. But I definitely recommend, you know, just if you are a woman who wants to be using her feminine energy and be living in that space and attract a partnership with a masculine man, I definitely would say, work on those kind of feminine qualities.
Most definitely. And I really strongly advise women to practice, with other male members of the family if they're feeling that they don't want to sort of practice with, if they aren't in a current relationship and they don't want to practice, they haven't got a partner to practice on, then practice with your son, practice with other male members of the family, being that more natural feminine self, and that the men see their softer side and your softer side, and see what responses you get.
Yeah, I really love that advice, Lyn. I think it's brilliant. And I completely agree. When I was sort of going through my own, investigation of this kind of these kind of energies and balancing things out, that was exactly what I did. I actually, and I kind of give similar advice. I would say, go and find men that are really rooted in their masculine, and have dinner with them. Maybe they're a friend, or maybe they're a work colleague, maybe they're a family member, but spend time with them. If it's a safe relationship that you feel comfortable in, it's going to allow you to bring out that softer side more. It's going to allow you to already have a level of comfort to practice that. So yeah, I completely agree with you, because if you've never done it before, or if you've been kind of suppressing it for such a long time, it will feel a little bit strange stepping into that space.
Most definitely. And I think some women actually look at being more vulnerable as a sign of weakness, as do men. But it's not.
Yeah.
Your vulnerability is your biggest, most powerful feminine strength. And it'll ultimately really melt the masculine.
Oh yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. It's so interesting how, we've, in the way that we've been conditioned to, look at certain traits, that they come across as something um, that's not a nice way of being, but actually, like you say, to be vulnerable, to kind of surrender to that masculine energy in some ways, it just gives you this magnetic attraction, more than anything. I think there's nothing more beautiful than seeing someone really in their feminine energy and being really open and vulnerable, to kind of what life has to offer them. I think that's absolutely, so beautiful. So we can definitely, change the mindset around what it means to be, in that energy space.
And this is what we're talking about from a healthy feminine, not from an unhealthy feminine. Being vulnerable from an unhealthy feminine is exactly that, allowing yourself to be walked all over. So again, I just want to emphasize that point.
Yeah, and I think it's so tricky, with this stuff. It's so easy because of the ways in which we've seen the kind of negativity of the feminine and masculine come through. It's really tricky in terms of actually, explaining it in a short podcast, how the healthy feminine looks and masculine feminine looks. But I think, as long as we keep reiterating, what the purpose of the balance in the energies is all about, and what good looks like.
And on that note, Fabienne, I'm going to wrap things up and once again say thank you so much for this discussion. I think it's going to be massively valuable to the listeners tuning in to learn more and appreciate more around understanding how the masculine and feminine energies work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lyn. Thanks for having me again. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today.
And on that note, would you share some contact information for Fabienne? I'll make sure, most of it will be covered in our show notes, but just as one point of contact for our listeners, would you share what that would be?
Sure. So if you would like to get in touch with me, you can go to www.fabsthoughts.com and you can find out more about me there. I have a book upcoming, coming out this year, which is going to be all based around love and a lot of this kind of stuff. So keep tuned for that.
Excellent. And we'll have to have you on again so we can promote that book, Fabienne.
Yes, definitely.
Well, once again, thank you so much. And thank you, the listeners, for tuning in to this episode. And I just want to leave you with the usual true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.